Hello readers, I'm Amy and today I'm going to do my book review for Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. Just a heads up, this will be a spoiler review because with the things about this book that bothered me, there's just really no way to talk about them without spoiling a couple of things. I'm not necessarily going to be talking about the plot, but I'll talk about the way magic is done and the way the different cities are divided up. It's going to be a lot of stuff about race and gender, honestly, so if you're not here for that kind of conversation, this is not the book review for you. But there will be some spoilers, not like heavy spoilers, but yeah, not my favorite book of his by far. I'll start off by mentioning Elantris. I read Elantris a couple years ago, and I really enjoyed that. That was his first published book, and a lot of reviews that I hear on it are like, oh, it's good, it's fine, but it's his first book, he just gets better from there. Elantris was way better than this. It has its problems, don't get me wrong. Talk about your not like other girls trope, that is Elantris. But Warbreaker just had so much more to it that I just wasn't happy with. I never write Goodreads reviews anymore, but I wrote a really long review on Goodreads if you want kind of like a breakdown of what I'm going to be talking about in this video. But one thing that I forgot to mention in my Goodreads book review was the name Vessel. Now, I guess I'll start with the plot a little bit. You have this magic system that revolves around using color, and you can suck the color out of things in order to use the power on other things. And we have these two sisters, they're princesses, and one of them ends up marrying the god king of this bigger city, and the other one kind of runs away from home and follows her to try and save her. She ends up dealing with a lot of mercenaries and with this mysterious other person who comes into the story. The city's main religion revolves around these gods. You have the god of bravery, I think is the biggest one, and then his name's Lightsong, and then you have what's her name? Anyway, this very voluptuous goddess who's always trying to sexually tempt him and who's really involved in politics. And then you have the god king, who's the head of all of them. He has the most breath, which is the power that you use with color. And so because he has so much breath, everything around him is really colorful. It's like a colorful kind of aura that he has around him is the best way I can explain it. But one of the sister that marries the God King, her name is Ciri. She has a name. You can call her Princess, you can call her Your Majesty, you can call her Ciri, whatever. But whenever she comes to this city, all of the priests, because each god has a set of priests, all of the God King's priests and the people around her call her Vessel. And I can see why they would do that at the start, because the idea is she's come to marry the king to have his child, so she's like a vessel carrying a baby. But it's so disrespectful, and I can see how it would be used to make a point, call her Vessel and then have the character stand up for herself and be like, no, I know I'm really only here for one purpose, but I deserve respect and I deserve to be called by my name. But she doesn't do that even once, and she's the kind of character that's got a lot of gumption, and she's really trying to figure things out and sneak around, find out what's going on. But for all the times that she stands up for other people or stands up for herself, she never says, hey, don't call me Vessel, that's not my name is Ciri. And I hate that that wasn't included in the book, because it would have been very much like her character. And it's if you're gonna have someone call this person Vessel, make a point out of it. Make a point that you shouldn't be calling people by what they are, you should be calling them by who they are, which is generally their name or their title. So the fact that that wasn't addressed just really didn't sit right with me. Next, I'm kind of going through my Goodreads review because it's been a couple days since I wrote it, and I'm okay, what do I want to talk about? Vavena. Vavena's the other sister. She was supposed to marry the God King, and then they were traded out, and so she follows her sister to try and save her. She is very pious. She has her own religion that she practices back at home. It's a very conservative religion. In order to protect themselves from people who use breath as a power, there is like no color or anything in this land. Very, very conservative. And she goes to save her sister, and she takes up with these mercenaries who worked for someone who worked for her dad. And the mercenaries I actually liked. They're very funny. The things that they say are kind of joking, but you figure out later that they're not really joking. But Vavena herself, I hated her so much. Like, there's being religious and still being a good person, and then there's being so religious that you cannot possibly see past that. And she was person number 2, where she's like, you're not upholding my values, so I really just don't like you and you're awful, and like, oh, this place is so gross, there's so many colors, like, there's so many people, why? And it's just like, be nice. You're in someone else's culture, like, be nice about it. And at one point, she ends up running off, and instead of being treated like the princess that she is living in the slums, and she's treated as less than dirt. And it was nice to kind of have that side of life shown to us, but she's only in the slums for probably 2 to 3 weeks before she's rescued and things get better. And for the rest of the book, she's like, oh, I lived in the slums, I've been through it all, I know what it's like, it sucks, I'm gonna stand up for these people. You don't know what it's like, though. Like, yes, you were treated horribly and were starving and homeless for 2 to 3 weeks, but that doesn't compare to these people who have been living like this for their entire lives. And to say, oh, I know what it's like, I've been there, just really solidified how much I absolutely loathed her character. It's like, you can have empathy and you can understand, but you didn't put up with that for years and years. You put up with that for like 2.5 weeks. So I don't think that was handled well. The gods, Light Song, I started off liking and then not so much, and then liked him at the end. He's kind of like the mercenaries, in which he's like, everything that he says is supposed to be a joke, but after a while of this, it was a consistent character for sure, but after a while of talking like this, it just kind of gets stale. Like, okay, we get it, we know what you're like as a person, you can cut it out and just talk normal for a little bit. So like, Light Song was fine, but the gods in general, Light Song is very buff, he's very like well proportioned in that way. All of the gods, for the most part, are very physically fit. They don't have to work for it, they don't have to diet, they don't have to exercise, they just have these perfect bodies. Or like the goddess who has a really voluptuous body. And there was this bit in there when they're talking about the gods where Brandon Sanderson writes a paragraph or two about diversity in the bodies and how like they're gods, but like some of them are more voluptuous than others. And it's just like, you're trying to talk about diversity and you're really sucking at it. And the way the paragraph was just put in there, like, oh, I should put in this little bit of political discussion or diversity discussion to make my book better, and it didn't even really fit in the story. And there's ways to talk about that stuff organically. This wasn't it. And just the way he was talking about body diversity, it's like you don't have diversity of bodies, though, in this story. You really don't. And the thing is, at the very end of the book, last 2 pages, we're told that the gods look the way they do because that's how they expect to look. So they expect that a goddess should have this sexy, voluptuous body, and so when they become a goddess, they have that sexy, voluptuous body. And if that had been stated at the beginning of the book when we were just learning about the gods, then the bodies of the gods and the way they were discussed wouldn't have bothered me because I would have understood the reason behind it. But instead, I go through 500 pages of this and I'm sick and tired of it. And then they finally explain, oh, this is how they expect to look. that would have changed my entire reading experience for the better if that had been mentioned at the beginning. So then we have race, and the best way for me to kind of explain this is to say, like, you have the immigrants who came over and made themselves Americans, even though we're from a ton of different places originally. And then you have the Native Americans who were there first and were like, oh, you have no claim on this area whatsoever. It was kind of like that, where you have the Pankal, who are like the Native Americans of the situation, and then you have the Hallandren and wherever the princesses are from, and they're kind of like the white people and the immigrants. And the princesses' land, like, they're very conservative, they're rather small, but they control some important areas. So I think they would be more similar to like Irish immigrants at one point, where like you don't really fit in, but you're white, but you don't really fit in. Sort of like that. But you have Hallandren and the princess's land, and they're just really coming to a head, and they decide they're going to start this war, and everyone's trying to find out, well, who started this war? Who did it? This is where, just heads up, this is where the really, really big spoiler is for, like, the biggest spoiler in my review for how things kind of go in the end. So Pankal, Native Americans in this situation, they were just taken over long time ago. They make up the servants of the higher classes in Hallandren, and turns out they're behind all of this because they want their two biggest enemies to have a war with each other and destroy each other so that they can then take that opportunity to bring themselves up. Now, I was on their side once we figured out how it was going to go at the end of the book, because it's like, if you put it in the perspective of Native America, like, yeah, this is their land, they deserve to have it back or to have reparations of some kind. But to have the Native Americans of the story be the villains, again, it just felt really gross. I'm like, I would rather this story be told from Pankal's perspective or with sympathy to their perspective, rather than really just making them out to be the enemy. There was some sympathy there, but it's like, you could have done this discussion better. Last thing I'm going to talk about is the magic system in general. So whenever you're born, you have a breath. The breath is of a certain strength, so if you're really sickly, you probably don't have a very strong breath. And you can give your breath to other people by vocally, clearly stating that you want that to happen. Vocally, like, you have to be able to speak. So this is where I think ableism really comes into play in the story. Because the God King, again, huge spoiler here, not like huge, but like, you find out probably halfway into the book, the God King, who has all of this breath, well, his breath has to be saved for the future. They gotta safeguard it. So the priests cut out his tongue so that he couldn't speak to use his breath. And whenever Ciri finds that out, she starts communicating with him and like teaching him how to write, because he hasn't really been taught how to write or read, so she teaches him this stuff. But I'm thinking, you're spending all of these nights together where he is writing down every single word that he is trying to communicate to you. And if Ciri didn't know sign language, then I can see her doing that. Or like, maybe you kind of come up with your own personal sign language to make things a little faster, because I can't imagine spending all night just writing and writing and writing every single word you want to say. That would be exhausting. It would be easier if Ciri maybe had learned some sign language. I mean, she's a princess. She's got to know how to communicate with a lot of different people with a lot of different abilities. And if she'd taught him sign language, they could have communicated a lot faster. And towards the end of the book, whenever he didn't have anything to write with and they're trying to communicate with one another, they could have just used sign. And the fact that in order to use breath, you have to clearly vocally state what you're going to do. Some people can do it just with their minds, but that takes a lot of training and it's really, really hard. What about the people who are deaf or mute? That they should be able to use magic whether or not they can speak. And not including that in the story, like, I get that Suzebron, the God King, like, not being able to speak, made it a huge part of the story. But this should have been accounted for And yeah, that's a breakdown of all of the reasons that I hated this book. Just a lot of race and gender stuff and ableism, and I didn't enjoy it because I just didn't enjoy it. All these things kept coming up and I'm like, this could have been done a lot better. This is by far my least favorite book that I've read of his so far. So it'll go in the pile of donations. Someone else will read it. Maybe they'll like it better. I didn't do a disclaimer at the beginning of this video. I don't really think I should have to, but the internet is the internet. This is not me trying to attack anybody. If you have your opinion, you have your right to that opinion. Please don't attack me for mine. But I know there's going to be mean people in the comments anyways. I didn't like this book. That's it. So please leave a comment down below if you've read this book, and if you have some thoughts, try and do it respectfully if you can. Please like, subscribe, be my friend on social media, and I will see all of you in my next video. Bye, friends.